I'm Vincent Grimaldi, so I am from Syracuse University. I live in Boston right now, so if anybody is in Boston, it'd be nice to meet up with you, and feel free to hit me up whenever. So just a quick introduction here. Get this going. Yeah, so Beta Gamma chapter, that happened last year, so super proud of that, and everything Syracuse has been doing. So just a super quick like introduction about myself. Like I said, I graduated 2019, and then I went to Boston College to try to pursue my master's degree. That went pretty well, and decided like once I finished that my my eventual career that I felt like would be good for me was to try to continue on and get my PhD. So I'm going to be doing that in the fall at Penn State. And so I was talking to a lot of bros in the past, and they had, mentioned to me that they are trying to, go to grad school, and a lot of stuff was not really that clear to them, or they felt like, they had a lot of questions that maybe weren't answered through the regular college process or like things of that nature. So I felt like it would be a pretty good opportunity just to go through sort of like the ins and outs of applying to graduate school and sort of what that feels like for a variety of different programs. And so it's sort of an interesting time to be presenting something like this, because if you're listening to this now, you're either really early on in your fall application process, which is super great, or I know I was talking to a couple of bros that they had just been accepted recently, but then they haven't started yet, so they're going to be doing that in the fall. So I think regardless of which situation you're in, it could probably be valuable for you on both sides of things. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into it. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I included in this presentation was actually how to identify and select your target schools. And the reason why this is like so critical is because depending on like what you're trying to do, in terms of like what are your goals, that's going to shift a lot, like what type of schools you're going to be looking at. And so just to give you a quick example, when I was applying to my master's program, the 5 schools that I initially selected as being the ones that I thought I was going to go to, I didn't end up applying to any of them. Because as I got to know the schools better and I got to go through the process, I realized that wasn't what I was looking for. And so I would really encourage you just to make sure that, you're asking the right questions in terms of like which schools you want to go to. And so one of the things that I think you should consider is that, do you want to go to grad school full-time or part-time? And that has a lot of different implications that I think are not immediately obvious to people. Some of the things are, if you're going to school full-time, right, you're going to need to pay for like that whole bill at the same time, right? And you might have a lot more due than if you were to go part-time and you were paying little by little, for example. Some of the other things are like, let's say you were, let's say you had like a job lined up that you might have really liked out of undergrad. And if it didn't make sense for you to leave that job right away, it might make sense for you to go part-time and continue working to sort of build up those skill sets. So it's just kind of questions you want to ask yourself. And another one too that's pretty big is, are you applying for something that's different than your undergraduate major? And there's nothing wrong with doing that for sure. But if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that you are applying to a program where that's relatively common, right? Because you don't want to, let's say you're a computer science undergrad, and let's say you want to pursue a career in consulting, so you want to get like a finance master's degree. That's totally awesome. But at the same time, you want to make sure that that type of program is applicable for you and that other people are in the same situation, right? Because you don't want to feel like you don't have the background to succeed, or you don't want to feel uncomfortable or things like that. So definitely recommend that you look into that. And another thing you want to look into also is the program that you're looking into, is it more industry focused? So are there a lot of built-in internship requirements, or is it a little bit more research focused? Things like, is there a master's thesis, or are you going to have to write like an original body of work before you get out of your program? So just like asking those questions and having an idea of what the answer is going to help you be able to like better discern whether that's a good fit for you. Another thing too is, what is your goal about going to graduate school? And I think that's a weird question that we don't like to ask, right? Because of course we all want to make as much money as possible, and that's obviously like a great goal. But in addition to that, there are other things that you should ask yourself, because for example, I'm in that middle category. When I was in my senior year, I was studying economics, and I felt like I was just getting to the interesting stuff at the end of my undergrad. I was like in my last classes and I was about to graduate, and I was like, shit, like this is really getting interesting now. But like, I felt like there's more I gotta know, right? I just wanted to like get some more skill set. I felt like if I were to stay, 2 to 3 more classes, 4 to 5 more classes, that's when I would really be getting into the nuts and bolts of things. So if you want to feel like you have an additional skill set, you want to develop it, that might be a pretty good case for you too. And of course, that's also going to help you make more money. So there's really a win-win there. And the other thing is like, are you just genuinely curious about something in particular? And so, yeah, if you're just genuinely curious about something, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? I think, you know, humans by nature are just curious people. And so if you're, let's say you love biology, right? And like you want to know as much as you can about one really particular subject, like that might be a pretty good case to either go for a PhD or like a master's with like a research requirement. There's nothing wrong with doing that, right? That's a totally human and innate thing. And just having the answer to those questions is super useful. I just want to quickly overview. I know most people are very familiar with this, but just like what type of different degrees are out there and what are some of the structural differences between them. So you have an MBA, which is a master's, of course, master's of business administration. In a master's degree, you know, in general, the difference between like a master's of science and a master's of business administration is that you might be a little bit more on the management side of things if you were to get an MBA, for example. If you were an MBA and you had a concentration in accounting, you might not just be an accountant, you might be managing accountants, right? Or you want to be on the human side of things. Whereas like a master's of science degree in accounting as an alternative, you might actually be the accountant, like doing the actual accounting. And so it depends. Do you want to be in a more management role or do you want to be in a more, you know, actual execution role? Similar things like a JD, for example, is going to prepare you typically for a legal career. One thing to note is that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a lawyer. There's other things you can do with a JD, but if you're really passionate about, let's say, advocating for a certain community of people within a certain demographic, and you feel like there's lacking legal representation within that group, that's a pretty good option for you. And one thing I just want to clear up too, and I hear this a lot, and it's really important, I think, to understand the difference that a PhD is not just a longer master's, right? It's like a structurally different thing. And I think it's important to note that because it has its own advantages and disadvantages. A PhD is a really research-focused degree in which you are trying to publish a scholarly body of work about one really particular thing. And it suits you really well for an eventual research career. So you could become a professor, for example, or you could become a researcher in the industry role. But it's a little bit more common for somebody to do that maybe after they've already got some exposure to something like that. So this is something I feel really passionate about. And I think it's really important to mention because I hear a lot of times like people say, oh, I felt like I should have gotten into this school, but for some reason I didn't. And I think one of the biggest things that people are missing when they're applying to graduate school is that they're just blind applying. So they're saying, let's say I want to get a degree in social work from USC. Great, right? They might just apply to USC and submit an application. But if you really want to be competitive in a school like that, one of the best things that you should do is actually make contact with the actual school beforehand. So let's say you found somebody online, either LinkedIn or from the school's website, and you said, yeah, like I can understand what they're doing is useful for me. Let's say they're doing research that you feel really passionate about. It would really be in your best interest to conduct an outreach email, something very concise, say, hey, I'm Vincent. I really like the research that you're doing. I have a few questions about your program. I thought it might be a really good fit for my graduate endeavors. Do you have a few minutes for a phone call, right? Because the second you do that, you're not just a number in a file attached to a random application, right? You're a name, somebody on the other end's actually hearing from you. And if you just do that and nothing else, you're already in a better spot than you would have otherwise been. But what you really want to do, if possible, is if you can, is escalate this to a phone conversation, right? So in the situation like, hey, give a few minutes to talk about XYZ, I have some program related questions. Even if you don't really have any questions, you should create questions so that you can get them on the phone, you can sell yourself, you can ask them about their research, and you can really develop yourself as a competitive applicant. And I think a lot of people, you know, they might be like afraid to ask questions. I notice it's like such a weird thing in graduate school where they think like asking questions is like a sign of weakness. But if you can get somebody on the phone who's an academic, they love talking about themselves, right? And so all you got to do is say, hey, I noticed you published something in a journal. Is it possible if I could ask you a few questions about that? And they're going to be really, really, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you could turn on your mic, definitely make a comment.
Oh, dope. Yeah, I just wanted to add on like about asking questions, like for a lot of graduate schools as well. A lot of times when you have to do interviews for graduate schools, it doesn't matter the program. At the end of the interviews that you do to get in, they will ask, do you have any questions? More often than not, that's actually a way for you to show off how much research you've done about their school and make a deeper connection. So like not just planning questions ahead of time, like things that you want to know, but also you want to ask more deeply about things that other people wouldn't ask, and that makes you appear like a better candidate. So that helps too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's one of those things where once you get used to it, and then the other thing is, like you said, once you get used to doing something like that, you won't even necessarily have to craft them in advance. You'll just get used to it where it's like, okay, I know like how to probe a nice follow-up question. And that's just like showing, how dedicated you are and how astute you are as a learner. So yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. I think that's a really good point. Don't take this with a grain of salt. This is sort of a tentative thing. It's a little bit funny, but it's a little bit serious at the same time. I've done, a lot of these phone conversations where I'm talking to prospective PhD programs or I'm talking to master's programs. You don't want to get somebody on the phone until you're ready, right? Like you want to make sure you've done your homework so that you don't get stuck and say, oh, like, what do I talk about? Like this person's asking me a bunch of questions and I don't feel like I'm that prepared. So if you're talking to somebody on the phone and if they're a prospective research advisor and you feel like you might be working with them, you definitely want to do your homework, right? Read their most cited work, go on Google Scholar, read their most recent work, read their, LinkedIn or their future work or their website, because you want to have a pretty good idea of like what their MO is as a person, right? Because if you feel like you're going to be working with them, super important. If your phone calls with a dean or like a program director, it's not quite as important to read their most cited work or their most recent work, but you definitely want to have an idea, because what if you are like from UW, for example, and then the person you're talking to is also went to UW, right? And it's like, you want to mention that, right? Go Huskies or whatever. And as much as people say that you don't, that doesn't really matter or whatever. I mean, humans are human at the end of the day. If they feel a connection with you, that's going to matter. So you just want to make sure you do your homework. And hold up, should open this chat here. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. And then same thing with the current students. I've noticed like in some schools, I've like asked to reach out to certain schools and they just refer me to another student instead of like an administrator, which is totally fine. I don't prefer it, but if you do, at least read their most recent work and just have an idea of their professional media, because you don't want to be going in blind, especially it's free to do this. So it's like, you might as well do it. I'm not going to like belabor the point on the brand enhancement, because I feel like a lot of people in the audience probably had presentations on, LinkedIn and how to brand yourself. But I just want to mention a couple quick things that are really easy for you to do and super effective when you're actually going to apply, is because, you want to make sure that your brand is in a good place when you're submitting applications like this. And so just a couple quick things that you can do. Make sure that your LinkedIn URL is custom URL. So it's Vincent, Grimaldi 15, whatever, something, just not a random string of numbers and letters and characters. You also want to make sure that you have 500 plus connections, which I know is super arbitrary, but it plays well into the LinkedIn algorithm, and your actually accounts, get rewarded when they have more than 500 plus connections. You'll appear more organically on search. You'll just be, more prevalent, more visible. You want to make sure, and it's something kind of funny that I learned this from, definitely. I learned this from, Brian DeSono. He was saying when somebody Googles you, they want to make sure they're finding, Vincent Grimaldi, the student, not Vincent Grimaldi, the serial killer, right? So the joke is like, there's a lot of other people, right, with my name who probably aren't me. And so you want to give yourself the best chance possible that you're actually the one being found and not, somebody else. And so it's one of those things, super easy to do. You might as well just do it. Similarly, this is interesting. So LinkedIn, if you're not familiar with this already, this is pretty powerful. You can choose on LinkedIn how you come across to other people, right? So when I'm stalking somebody else's like professional media, I can choose, do I want to come across with everything, my name, my headline, my tagline, like fully visible, or do I want to be a little bit more anonymous, right? And since this is the case, you want to use this to your advantage, right? If you want somebody to know that you're doing your homework, right? Like let's say I'm trying to get into Penn State and I'm stalking like the dean or whatever because I'm about to have a phone call with her. I want her to know that I looked her up, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do your homework. But don't be fully visible if your profile is not ready, right? So I know a lot of people that they might be just making their LinkedIn or they're just getting it ready. If you're, still under construction, right? Your about section needs some tweaking or you're not ready to go. Like I wouldn't recommend you to be fully visible, right? Because you are trying to induce a look back, right? And if you want to induce a look back, you want to make sure your profile is ready to go before you do something like that. So you can also stalk in private mode if you're not ready. But if you are ready, make yourself known, stalk the right people, show them that you're doing your homework, and then encourage to look back. And just make sure that you're cognizant of the privacy setting beforehand, because once you look, it's too late. And so just be cognizant of that. Similarly, and if you're familiar with LinkedIn, you'll notice that LinkedIn has a skills section. And so this is really crucial and it's really great. This is one of the really great things about being in a fraternity is that you have other people at your disposal that maybe other groups wouldn't have, right? And so it's great if I tell you that I'm good at marketing, you might not believe me, you might believe me, who knows, right? But if my professor says I'm good at marketing, or if a lot of other people say I'm good at marketing, then that, builds the case that I'm good at marketing, right? You need that third party verification. So if you're, I know we're not in chapter right now because everything's electronic, but when everything's back to normal, if you just take like 10, 15 minutes at the end of chapter and go and endorse all of your other bros skills on LinkedIn, every single one from all your bros, and then they all do the same to you, right? You're going to have whatever it is, 20 plus, 30 plus endorsements on all of your skill sets. And like, think about how much stronger your profile looks. So instead of just saying, hey, I'm really good at coding with Python, or I'm really good at coding with C++, all 30 of your bros are saying you're good at coding with C++. And it gives you a lot more credibility than you just saying it yourself. And since you have pledge bros, right, there's really no excuse not to be like, oh, I can't find someone to endorse me. Similarly with recommendations, it's sort of the same thing, right? It doesn't have to be like this crazy drawn out recommendation. You don't have to be an author. You don't necessarily have to be a writer, but you can say, hey, I worked with Jimmy and Billy right before, and they were really great at time management, and they really reinforced the deadlines, and it was a pleasure working with them, and I would love to work with them again, right? And you write a recommendation on their profile. They can write you a recommendation back on LinkedIn. And if you repeat this process numerous times, eventually you're going to have your profile be super rich with different recommendations, and you're going to stand out, from crowds who don't really have anything like that. And so again, great thing for being in a fraternity, right? Because you have all these people at your disposal, where in other situations it might be a little bit harder to find them. So I'm going to take a moment just to talk about branding on a personal website. If you're sort of thinking like, why do I need a personal website? I think it's a fair question. And I sort of used to ask myself the same question, but there are some really distinct advantages actually from a personal website in addition to having a LinkedIn, because you can include information that doesn't necessarily fit into the custom LinkedIn mold, right? If you're just using LinkedIn to show your accomplishments, you don't have the freedom to be creative. Every single profile, while it has its own information, it looks the same, right? It's the same user interface. LinkedIn doesn't do a great job of prioritizing projects or publications or things that are really creative, right? So if you're like a user experience designer, I mean, that's not really being recapitulated on a LinkedIn profile, right? But if you actually have a personal branding website, then you're controlling the narrative. If you have something that's really important to you that you feel like differentiates you from the crowd, you can put that front and center, right? You can put it in the beginning, and you can be creative about the way you brand yourself. Another thing too is that you can use it strategically in an email signature. And so when I was applying to my master's programs, I was thinking like to myself, like, damn, I'm emailing so many people, right? Every day I'm checking in about statuses, and I'm asking about, funding, and I'm just like checking in. And I thought that's such a waste if I'm not using those email correspondence to my full advantage, right? So then it dawned on me, what I should do obviously is put my website inside of my email signature. And then I decided to attach Google Analytics to the email signature website. And so I could see if I was emailing people who I wanted to get on their good side, I could see that they would actually click on my website from time to time just from our email correspondence. So think about the extra branding that gets you, because honestly, sometimes you just have to get lucky. Like, you just need to get your materials in front of the right eyeballs, and not everybody is going to be reading your application. So this is another way that you can basically get your application in front of more people. Put it in your email signature. People who are curious, which is typically academics, right? Or the ones that are curious for the most part, are going to be the ones doing this. And so they'll probably click on it. If you're wondering how to actually build a website, obviously those who are technically inclined, or this is not a big deal, but I know I wasn't super technically inclined in undergrad, and I didn't really want to pay for anything. So I decided to just use Google Sites. It's totally free. You get a free domain and you get free hosting. The one trade-off is that the word Google will be in your website. So it'll be www.google.vincent.com. But at that time, I was totally fine with having Google on my website for it to be free, right? That's totally fine. I was undergrad, didn't have a lot of money, and I just really wanted to brand myself. If you wanted to do something a little bit more advanced with a little bit more customization, you could use Squarespace, Weebly, WordPress, Wix. Those are relatively low cost. So on my Squarespace one, the domain is free, and then the low cost hosting I think is $99 a year. So it's not too cost prohibitive, right? It's relatively attainable for most people. So I definitely would recommend looking into that. Even with in a 4-hour period, you could probably sit down and build a relatively compelling website in 4 hours, just to get the basics across, right? Not saying to do anything crazy, but just to get your basics. Super useful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual anatomy of a grad school application, which of course does vary a little bit depending on which type of programs. But after, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it, applying to a lot of different schools over the past couple of years, they almost all follow this same structure, right? This is sort of like your basic anatomy of a grad school structure. And so I broke it down to what I call the expression components. So these are the things that are non-static, like they don't exist in one moment in time. You can control the narrative on how you basically brand these things. So the number one thing that is going to be on basically every grad school application is your CV. So just to clarify, I didn't realize this was a confusion until right before the presentation. So CV does not mean cover letter. It actually means curriculum vitae, which translates to the course of one's life. So it's a little bit different from a resume in the sense of you want everything and anything on there that's at all tangentially related to your professional development. So if you've hosted workshops, you've gone to graduate events, you've volunteered, you've taken really, really great coursework that you feel like is related to your future degree, and anything that you've done in your professional, academic, or otherwise career can be on your CV. And the really great thing about this is it's not limited to one page like a resume. That it's a very different structure. And so you can go ahead and just, if it's 30 pages, it's 30 pages. That's what it is. The personal statement is basically who you are in your opportunity to tell your life story, right? After someone reads your personal statement, they should feel like they have a pretty good idea of who you are as a person and all the life events that have culminated into your current passion to pursue a graduate degree, right? So like did something difficult happen to you early on in your life, and then because of that, now you want to like be an advocate for social work, or potentially did you grow up in an adverse area or an adverse climate, and you were able to like successfully overcome that, and because of that overcoming, you're a stronger person today, and now you want to advocate for other people like you, for example. Like those type of components are super key to put in a personal statement, because one of the interesting things about grad school is that they want to make sure if they accept you that you're going to finish, right? It's obviously beneficial for the school that you're going to finish the program. So they want to accept people who are as passionate as possible and not just like going to the school because their parents want them to get a graduate degree and that's like the best one for them. And obviously like that happens a lot, and there's nothing wrong with it per se, but they definitely want someone who's tailored to that school and they have a specific passion. And so the other thing is going to be your statement of purpose. So statement of purpose is different than your personal statement in that you want to show why you will succeed at this particular university. So for example, if you're a structural biology major as an undergraduate, does this university have like chromatography labs that you feel like are really well suited to like house your research? Is there a commitment to spending at that particular school that is very well aligned with your prospective research area? Why are you applying to that school in particular? Did you take coursework in the past that's really well aligned with the prospective first year coursework? Is there a group of professors there that you absolutely love their research and you feel like that environment is your environment to be successful, right? So it's a little bit more focused on the school. This is definitely the case where it's gonna be annoying, but you're gonna have to write a different statement of purpose for every single school. It's not something that you can sort of transfer over from one to the other. You can to some degree on the personal statement, but if you are doing on the statement of purpose, it's a chance that it's probably not very good. And then interviews, if you like interviews and you feel confident in your ability to speak, you should definitely request an interview. Not all schools will grant them because some schools there's too many people, but if you have the opportunity to do it, it's really great because you're obviously going to get in front of probably multiple people actually at the same time, and you can really sell yourself. And some schools are required anyway, so not too much of a question there. Then I sort of call this the like quantitative components of the application. Letters of recommendation are not necessarily quantitative, but I'm putting them in the category because they're outside of your control. So you're gonna have to, I'm gonna get there in a second on how to choose them, but the things that are truly quantitative are gonna be your test scores. So I was speaking with a couple of bros before this about, how to prep for test scores and things like that. So GMAT is gonna be your go-to test score for like a business degree. So if you're trying to do like a business economics or an MBA program, you're gonna have to take a GMAT. And if you're doing just about any other Masters of Science program or Masters of Arts program rather, or either, it's gonna be the GRE. LSAT is going to be your law school, and MCAT is gonna be your med school. See, test scores are an interesting thing. Unfortunately, test scores, the literature is pretty rich actually, that test scores don't do very good job actually of capturing the aptitude of different students. The literature also shows pretty clearly that the environment in which you grow up, whether positive or negative, has a really large impact actually on your test score. And so I feel they're pretty like unfair measurement actually of how you are as a student, especially because they're just occurring in a single period of time, right? You go to the test station and you take the test and it's one day, rather a transcript and your other grades are a culmination of a whole semester's worth of work. But they count, right? So as much as it sucks for that to be the case, you have to kill it, right? In a lot of situations. What I really would recommend doing if you're not a great test taker, which is totally the case with me, is study a little bit over a long period of time. So I knew going into it that I wasn't going to be a good GRE like taker because I took the practice test, and my score was low. So I thought, okay, what do I have to do to like get this score up? So for me personally, one of the biggest things to know about these standardized tests is that the questions themselves are not inherently difficult. What's difficult about the test is that they're tricky because they try to send you off in different routes and find a roundabout way to answer a question that could be answered in a shorter way, right? So you're wasting time. That's the whole, that's the core philosophy of a standardized test in these situations. So one thing that was really useful for me is I actually watched walkthrough videos. So I would literally go on YouTube and watch people take the GRE, like practice tests, as they would vocally say their thought process in their head. Outside. So they would say, oh, I see this type of question is a probability question. So here's how I'm going to think about it. Here's how I'm going to not go down the rabbit hole of trying this difficult way to solve it. And I'm instead going to do the shortcut, right? And so after I watched like literally 10, 15 hours of those, I started to understand that the questions fall into just certain categories. And once you understand the method to apply to the category, you can get the shortcut right away, and then you yourself can begin to recognize it. Another thing too is just like, if you, I don't know, a lot of people are obviously really busy and you have a lot of life commitments. I just like did it. So I studied 40 minutes every day before work. And I know it seems like just a really small amount of time, but over the course of a year, right, that's a lot of hours. And so when you look back at it, you don't ever feel like you were killing yourself, but you actually did a ton of work, right? And so if you're that case and you are similar to that, I recommend that. Just the reason I put the application fees on here is just make sure you budget a little bit. It's unfortunately applying to graduate school is really expensive for a lot of people. I think between like my master's and PhD, I spent like close to like $3,000 or $4,000 just on GRE, like the actual test, prep, the application fee, like all those different things. And so I justified it because I told myself, like, when I'm 60, am I going to remember the $3,000 I spent, or am I going to remember like how happy my life is now, right? Like that sucks sometimes, but you just make sure you budget in advance, and that if you're going to apply in the fall, start putting away some money today, just so you can make sure you're not getting yourself in a tough spot. Letters of recommendation, I think it really deserves its own slide, because the letters of recommendation section actually holds a ton of weight on your application. It's the same logic to like LinkedIn skills, right? If I tell you I'm good at math, you might be like, yeah, sure, right? Maybe he's good at math. But if my professor, who has a PhD in mathematics, who taught me for the whole semester, says I'm good at math, like then you're going to believe I'm good at math, right? So these letters of recommendation are absolutely critical. And so one of the strategies that I recommend you use, or if you're having difficulty with your application, is use your recommender to supplement weak parts of your application. So if you take the GRE and your GRE scores for math is not that high, for example, then you should maybe ask your Calc 2 professor for a letter of recommendation if you did well on Calc. Now, I'm aware that the GRE doesn't test Calc, so those are different, but they're mathematic disciplines, right? So on the other end, the person reading your application is going to say, well, he only scored a 297 on his math GRE, but damn, he got an A in Calc 2, right? And his professor is raving about his work ethic and his commitment to excellence. So by virtue of that, you can supplement your weaker parts of your test, of your application with letters of recommendation. Unsurprisingly, the earlier you ask, the better the letter is going to be, obviously, right? If you ask 2 days before it's due, you could probably imagine what kind of letter that's going to be, obviously. So ask in as advance as possible, and you're going to get a better letter for the most part. And the last thing is something that I did not realize this at first, but I've heard stories about this, so I think it's worth pointing out, is you should always ask for a positive letter of recommendation. And that obviously seems implied. Like, why would I ever have a letter of recommendation that's not positive? But you got to remember something here. academia is very cutthroat, right? So professors are putting their name on the line when they recommend you. So in a lot of cases, they might throw you a bone and just recommend you positively anyway, but some professors are not like that. Their philosophy is not like that. If they don't feel like they can actually write you a positive letter of recommendation, they will write you a letter of recommendation that's not glowing, right? And you don't want someone to submit a letter of recommendation on your behalf that's negative. So just say, hey, are you willing to write me a positive one? In a lot of cases, they're going to be honest with you and say, hey, yeah, I feel like I can do that. So just double check. It doesn't hurt to do that. I want to get into like some costs and some funding situations. Yeah, good point. Really good point. So the chat says, giving your letters of recommendation, your resume, CV, and personal statement. Yeah, it's a great point. It's going to give them more fodder, right? So they actually need something to write about, especially if they don't know you that well. If you only had one class with them, it would definitely be good to, give them more like ammunition, basically. This is something that's not super fun, but it's very important, right? Because going to graduate school is a business decision at the end of the day. So it is important to talk about the finances and to understand what this looks like. So I want to talk about how like the economics of different degree programs fit together. And so one of the things that is important to note is that master's programs are pretty expensive for the most part, right? They're the cash cows of the university. They are, in many cases, where the university derives most of their revenue from a degree perspective, right? And so it's important to note that, yeah, thank you. It's important to note that if you're going to apply to a master's program, and it's really expensive and you see the sticker price, and that's, don't be surprised by it, but there's ways to sort of get around that a little bit. And so I'm going to talk about some funding sources and how to sort of mitigate the cost of your education. I also want to just mention some just general cost of living things. Just remember that when you're going to graduate school, where the graduate school is geographically located is actually going to dictate to a high degree your total cost of attendance, right? So I was talking with Justin Lowe, another bro he went to school in North Carolina, now goes to school in Seattle. He, in North Carolina, his rent was something like $300 a month. Now I think in Seattle, his rent is definitely upwards of $1,000 a month, right? And so just remember that where you go to school, like that rent is going to be a part of your cost of attendance. So just remember that if you're trying to save money, or if you're on a really tight budget, that don't live necessarily in a city that's going to be really, really cost prohibitive for you to live. Some debt is good debt, so I definitely recommend a cost benefit analysis. Like if you let's say you already have some undergrad debt and you're a little bit worried about taking on more debt, that's obviously a fair concern. Look at the starting salary for the degree, right? Look at the cost of attendance. Look at how much am I going to have to borrow to make it happen? Is it worth it for me to borrow $60K to make $80K? Like things like that. Just don't just do it to do it, right? Make sure you run the numbers. Make sure the environment is a good fit for you, right? If you visit the school and you don't feel comfortable on campus, or you feel like it's just not for you, don't be like, oh, I can probably figure it out, right? Listen to your gut. It makes a big difference. You want to make sure that you feel comfortable where you're going to be at, because it's a relatively stressful endeavor, right? And so if you're spending like 10 hours in the lab and then you got to come home to an apartment you don't like with roommates you don't like, it's really going to impact your mental health, right? It really is. So you want to make sure that think about it in advance, situate it. It's one of those things. I was talking to another bro he had lived in the Lambda house during his graduate program. And he was just saying like he couldn't, he liked that during his like previous life, but he couldn't even get like a time to focus because it was a little bit loud for him when he was trying to do like meetings at home. And so just think about the role of your environment and how that plays into things like that. So I actually want to just do a really quick case study on actual costs of different programs. So I just chose Boston as an example. So if you were, for example, wanted to get a Master's of Science degree in finance in Boston, the total program cost is going to cost you about 56 grand or so, total program cost. So that's no matter how many years it takes you. And then if you were to do an MBA in Boston, on average, it's going to be about 55 grand. But granted, that's rightward skewed. So there's some programs that are quite a bit more expensive on the top tier, but generally, and I put PhD as variable because for the most part, PhDs are funded. So it doesn't necessarily fit too well into this story. But one thing I want to keep in mind is if you look on the bottom of these circles, you're going to notice it's on average, it's going to take you about a year and a half to finish a Master's of Science in Finance, for example. That's going to add about 21K to your total program cost because you're going to have to pay for cost of living and you're going to have to pay for your housing, right, for 1.5 years. In the MBA, even though the sticker price is the same on paper, 55K, it's going to take on average 2 to 3 years, right? And so you're going to want to make sure that you're ready to put that type of financial investment in to be in that location for a little bit longer. And so just to see what that looks like in a 1 year example, I took the MS program finance and I broke it down in the chart. So on the right-hand chart, you have the cost for 1 year. It's a single year on average. So for example, let's say your tuition was 28K, right? Well, you're still gonna have to get your housing, in there somewhere, right? Because that's part of your cost of living. So you can add another 10K in there or so, give or take some percent. I'm just giving you ballpark. Then you're gonna have an additional cost of living, right? So that's things like, you still want to have a life. You're gonna go out. You're gonna have friends. You might have car payments, insurance, books, food, right? Everything like that it takes to live. And so, your total program cost in a given year is not your sticker price, right? You want to make sure that you have the mindset that you might spend 50K in a given year. And this, again, does not account for scholarships or fellowships, which I'll get into in a second here, but it's just sticker price, right? In a Master's of Science program is a STEM designated degree program. So you can borrow a maximum of $20,500 from a standard graduate loan per year. That's the max you can borrow on a standard graduate loan. So that means that you're going to still need to cover, assuming you weren't working, so assuming that you didn't have any supplementary income or scholarships, there's still going to be 30K, right, left over that you're going to have to borrow from a Graduate Plus loan. And the reason I want to break this into two distinct sections is that Graduate Plus loans have a higher interest rate than your standard graduate loan. And so if possible, you ideally want to minimize the amount that you have to borrow from those loans because, of course, the interest rate is higher and obviously that's compound interest extrapolated over a given period of time. And so it's just important to sort of make sure your head is in that situation. And so that's where this comes in a big sense. I don't know if anybody is already familiar in the audience with NSF Graduate Fellowship, but it's probably one of the best, definitely one of the best graduate fellowships available for students. Not everybody's eligible, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you're eligible, but I suspect many people actually who are here are eligible for this fellowship. It will cover your whole cost of attendance with a stipend as well on the side. And the acceptance rate for the fellowship is somewhere between like 15 and 20%, which is, it sounds low, but that's not that low, right? So if you really put effort into getting that application, like they're covering your whole program cost and they're giving you a stipend. So it's annoying, I'll be honest with you, it's annoying as hell to apply to. It's very stringent. There's a lot of steps, but the reward is so great, right? I mean, that's really, really great situation. So I definitely recommend you apply. External fellowships are fantastic. Even now, like where I'm at, I still apply to them, right? If you go on, like, for example, the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, has a really great website. They have a really great website where they aggregate tons of external fellowships. You can actually just search, let's say I'm an economics major, right? They can literally give you fellowships that are tailored to you in particular, that are only qualified for economics majors, right? So you're reducing the pool of potential applicants. You're literally just reducing the denominator. There's fewer applicants if you're just specializing on highly specialized fellowships. So I try to make a point to like apply to like 10 every week. If you think about that, that's 40, it's 40 a month. That's 120 in a 3-month period. You're going to get some of those, right? So just, I know it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of money. Be clever, apply to the ones, that you feel like you're a good fit for. After you apply to enough fellowships, you're going to notice that a lot of the prompts are actually really similar. And so you can actually reuse, not the whole essay, but you can reuse large components of the essay and you can be really successful in getting fellowships. So definitely recommend doing that. I want to talk just quickly and end, I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So I just want to end with some resources. So if you guys are familiar with Google Sites, I mentioned that's free website hosting. TweetDeck, if you want to manage multiple Twitter accounts. I point this out because academics love Twitter. So if you really want to get out there and brand yourself, use Twitter. Canva is absolutely fantastic. So great graphic design software, especially for people who are not from a design background. So I have like no design experience and very fortunately I've created some stuff that's okay, right? It's passable in that sense for portfolios. Kaggle is a fantastic platform in which you can learn a variety of programming languages, Python, C++. It gives you mock projects for free actually, and you can go in with the different software and learn how to use their languages. Great for, great if you don't have any programming experience and you want to gain some. And Google Keep is a fantastic task management software where you can color coordinate and it ties in with the rest of the Google ecosystem. So it's really just a phenomenal situation. Thank you. And so I want to talk about like what you can do with Canva. So this is sort of what I was meaning by um, great resources. So I really wanted just to get some business cards for some networking events that I was doing in graduate school. And I just wanted to basically design my own that weren't part of the school's program, since I think BC wanted like $100 or something to print me like custom business cards. And I was like, no, I don't really want to pay $100 because I don't know, trying to watch like every penny. And so I figured out that if you just design your own on Canva, they'll just ship it to your door for $11 for free shipping, 50 of them with really, really great like quality and really great cardstock. And yeah, super easy. You can even like customize the back too. So it's double-sided. I ended up putting like my QR code on my website on the back of the card and then put the regular stuff on the front, and it's not even extra. So if you are in a situation where you want business cards for graduate school or otherwise, if this is your for anything in general, definitely recommend it. Also was talking about you want to basically customize your branding as much as possible to your like career. So I have a really good friend, his name's Josue Figueroa. He goes to Michigan and he's a user experience researcher and major. And so he just created this really awesome resume using a Canva template that basically he's a user experience guy. So he wants to make sure that his resume is conveying the fact that he's competent in user experience, right? And that he can design things with some requisite level of skill. So he designed a bunch of these, and I think he shipped them. Canva automatically shipped it to his door, I think for like $13. He was able to get like 100 of them or something like that. So if you're really want a great resume, you're going to a career fair and you feel like you want to tailor it as much as possible, Canva has really great pre-made templates, so you don't have to do anything on your own. So just close by a quick review. Recommend starting early. Identify the degree type and ask yourself those questions because your list is going to morph and change over time. Make contact with the relevant parties and make sure that you make your presence known. You want to make sure you update your branding as much as possible and make sure that your branding's at a really great place, right? Because it's free for you to do that, and it's really going to pay dividends down the line when you're trying to create a competitive application. And also gives yourself plenty of time because you want to make sure that your mentors can review like your letters of recommend or your statements of purpose and your personal statements and all those stuff. There's no reason that you can't have other people help you review the content, right? You write it, get somebody else to see it, and make sure you submit something that is the best possible quality. So if you have any questions in general, or like if something comes up later on, you can definitely like feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to like talk to people who want to apply to graduate school or help them narrow their list or anything like that. Even if they have just questions about like different kinds of programs. So if you, I know, especially if anything comes up later on too, like if you are going through a program and you're having trouble, identifying like, should I take this test or like which study resource is best for me? Reach out to me by email or phone number or LinkedIn or whatever, and I'll definitely get back to you. And so I'm just going to open up. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to either shoot me in the chat or just like use your microphone. Yeah, thank you, Noam. Appreciate it.
Hey, Vincent, it's Billy.
How you doing?
Hey, so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your personal experience with talking with professors. I know that strategy sound, really good, but I wonder if you could just, dig a little bit deeper about how those conversations went.
Yeah. So basically the way I did it is so I can give a concrete example. So when I was applying to Penn State, one of the things I like to research myself is social informatics. So I'm really interested in how like trust and privacy operate in different socio-technical systems. So for example, when someone's on Reddit or they want to create a bank account or want to do something online, what is the role of anonymity and trust and privacy in those different systems? So I found a professor at Penn State, his name is Daniel Susser, who does exactly that. Like that's the type of research he does, right? And so I'm like, obviously it would behoove me to reach out to him. I got to make sure I reach out to him. So I sent him an email and I said, hey, Dr. Susser, I noticed that you working on trust and privacy in different, online systems. That's like a research area I'm really passionate about. Would you have a few minutes just to like have a phone conversation? We could talk about if you're potentially recruiting in this upcoming semester for funded PhD graduate positions. And I had a few program related questions about Penn State, for example. And I didn't actually, at that time, I actually didn't have any program related questions, but I needed a trigger, right? Because if I just sent him an email saying, hey, I really love your work, I really want to go to Penn State, he might see that and be like, oh, great email, but like not reply to it because there was no action item, right? So I made sure that at the end of the email, I actually included, hey, I really love your work. I love what you're doing. I would love to work with you. Can you reach back out to me? Like, is there a way that we can create a conversation together? And he said, hey, I reviewed your LinkedIn. I think you would be a really great candidate, but I would love to obviously learn more about you, because he doesn't know me, right? Just from the email. So we set up a phone conversation, and that's really where I started developing this stalking depth chart, because I was like, okay, if someone is basically having a phone conversation with you, that's basically an interview, right? They're not using the word interview, but that's a de facto interview. So I said, well, if I'm about to have a potentially 30-minute phone conversation with this guy who's potentially going to pay for me to go to school for 5 years, I want to make sure I absolutely kill that, right? So I read his most cited work to make sure that if he mentioned something that's really well known in the field, I would just be like cognizant of its existence. His most recent work is an indication of what he's doing right now. So I want to make sure I'm aligned with that, and just generally familiar. So I would say express interest, include a trigger so that they can reach back out to you, and then ideally facilitate a phone conversation. Once that happens, make sure you can be prepared, and then hopefully go on from there. That's what I would say. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, man. Enjoy Penn State.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know.
Hey, Vincent, I had a question too, actually.
Sure.
So you recommended for people who aren't like great test takers that we start early and study a little bit over a long time. I guess how far ahead of time did you start studying before you started applying to graduate school, and like what were some strategies or like resources that you use specifically to
Yep.
better
Good
your skills
question.
like for that?
Yeah, so one thing to note is that if you can apply, you can take the GRE once every 21 days. So like that's just something to know in case that you take it and you bomb it and you're like, oh shit, I got to submit the application soon. You got 21 days to wait. So I would recommend, like most graduate applications are going to be due between November and February. And so you want to make sure that, let's say your graduate program has a deadline of November. I would say you definitely want to take a test in the summer. Take one test in the summer, maybe like June or July, and then take another test right before the application's due, maybe in like October, right? So honestly, it sounds crazy, but let's say you're going to apply to graduate programs in the fall. It's probably a pretty good time to start now, because if you started now, and let's say you studied like a little bit every day until October, you will be very prepared to take a GRE test in October, like very, very prepared.
Okay.
So Magoosh is I think I'm saying it right. Magoosh is like I swear it's like the premium brand for test prep. It's not the premium brand. I shouldn't say that. It's not the most well-known brand, but in my experience, it's the best brand. They have like really phenomenal like tips. So you can either get a book, but they actually have a website that has interactive modules, and they will teach you how to take the test. So it's not like you're just taking a book where you're learning how to take it. They're teaching you how to take it. Like, oh, you see this question, that's a trigger. So then with that trigger, what do I do with it from there? So I'd recommend Magoosh, and I would say start now if you're applying in the fall, and take at least 2 tests. Your score will typically go up in the second test. Yeah, and also if you take a practice test, also know that the result is a pretty good indication of how you will do. So if you take a practice test and you do it the right way by timing yourself, and you actually take it in like a legitimate manner, I found that my score is like within 3 to 5% of the practice test. So by that, you can see, okay, I have an idea of what kind of schools I can get into, because you know basically how you're going to do on the test. So I would definitely say work with that. Yeah. Somebody dropped the link in here. Great. Magoosh. Yep. That's the one.
Thank you.
Yeah. In general, test taking end of spring. Yeah. Yeah, go for it. I would say take a test in the summer if you can. Is definitely be great. And then if you need to, like, I don't know, when I was doing the PhD application, I was a little bit late, and so I think I ended up taking one test in November for an application that was due in December. But I don't recommend it because it takes time for the test to get in the GRE. It's automatically scored on some parts, but then there's a human who comes in and actually has to score the written component. So there's like a delay period where you want to make sure that you're not holding up your application for like a test or something like that. So yeah, good question though. Really good question. Unfortunately, tests they suck, but they're a huge part of the American academic system for now. I think in the future it might be a little different, but the California school system just waived all of their SAT requirements for like undergrad. So maybe we'll see a shift in the future for like similar standardized tests for graduate programs. I think we will. So I think the time is up. So I definitely really want to appreciate everybody coming to the session. And again, if you ever feel like you need a resource or anybody to reach out to for graduate school, definitely more than happy to help anybody out. And I think it's obviously really noble actually to pursue advanced education. And so any way that I can help would be great. I would definitely be willing to do that. So